Making anything new is always trial and error. We almost never get it right at the first attempt. So this time, rather than showing you just the end product, I'm going to show you all the attempts it took us to get there. So I set out to make a set of wooden plates, and the first few attempts weren't exactly great. For the first plate, I cut a couple of pieces of plywood into 12-inch squares on my table saw and then glued and clamped them together. I'm using regular plywood available commercially, and I'm cutting out a rough circle using my jigsaw and mounting it on my lathe. I'm choosing a spindle gouge with a narrow head to start the shaping. Now the first thing to do will be to reduce the diameter of this plywood piece from 12 inches to about 9 inches. So it's time to start cutting. Once the size comes down to about 9 inches, I measure and double check the size and then go back to shaping the outside. The plate will curve towards the bottom. So first I'm using my spindle gouge to remove more wood from the bottom, and then using my skew chisel I'm going to complete the rest of my shaping. Once I'm happy with the outside shape, I rearrange the tool rest so I can start working on the inner cavity of the wooden plate. The plywood I'm using is made up of alternating layers of light and dark colored wood. So removing each layer as I carve into the wood looks pretty cool. The plywood I'm using here doesn't seem to have any hardwood layers, so I make pretty quick progress using my parting tool and my skew chisel. I'm working on reaching the desired depth of the plate first before working on the walls and the edges of the plate. Because plywood is made up of different layers, I have to be a little bit more careful as the plate gets a little thinner. There's always the risk of tearing these individual layers if I'm too aggressive with my chisel, and that'll ruin the look of the plate. And exactly what I was afraid would happen has happened. So this was the first attempt at making a plywood plate. As you can see, it turned out fine, but it looks kinda ugly. So for my second attempt, I cut 1-inch strips of plywood and glued and clamped them with the edge grain facing up. I cut out a rough round shape using my jigsaw and went to work on my lathe again. Edge gluing the plywood creates a pretty cool looking pattern, and if I can finish this plate, it should look pretty striking. But then this happened, so that's a second failed attempt. I'm going to go back to what I really prefer, and that's solid wood, and I'll see if I can make a plate out of that. Third time's a charm. This time I'm cutting out 2 blocks of black shirish and a strip of birch and gluing and clamping them together. I'm hoping this time I get it right, and I'm a little bit more confident because unlike plywood, this piece of wood doesn't have as many layers. Now it's back to repeating the same process. The plate that I want to make will be about 9 inches in diameter. The first thing to do will be to remove all this excess wood so that I can reach a diameter of around 9 inches. Next, I'm using my spindle gouge and my skew chisel to create a curved shape towards the back of the plate. I love working with hardwoods like black shirish and shisham because as you keep cutting into the wood, the dark rich color of the wood is slowly revealed. With the outer edge of the plate complete, I've repositioned my tool rest here to carve out the inside of the plate. Carving hardwood and even plywood, which is pretty tough, requires slow, steady passes with the chisels I have. Now the chisels I'm using are made by a local blacksmith, and the ones I need to make these plates faster are chisels with carbide tips. Gotta get my hands on some of those, but until then, I have to make do with what I have. Once I reach the depth that I'm looking for, I use my skew chisel to run some cleanup passes to smoothen out the surface. I'm using a round nose chisel to clean up the walls and the edges of the plate, and once that's complete, I can move on to sanding. I start sanding with 80 grit sandpaper and work my way all the way up to 400 grit. For the finish, I apply 3 coats of food safe polish made by ICA, and with that, my wooden plate is finally complete. So there you go. After the first few failed attempts, I actually managed to get it right. When you're making something new, the important thing is to keep on going, no matter what setbacks you have. I went ahead and created a few more variants of these wooden plates, and even managed to go back and finish the ones out of patterned plywood.